Okay, so welcome to Module 2 of the Subconscious Reprogramming program. All right, this slide here, you're trapped in your content box and you don't even know it. What does that mean? What that means is that most of us try to create change in our life from who we already are. Many years ago, Albert Einstein said that a problem can never be solved at the level it was created. So what most of us try to do is we find ourselves in situations and circumstances in life and places we don't want to be, and we're the one who created that place. Then what we do is because we're the one who created that place, we try to change from the very same person who created that place in the first place. So what this slide means is that you have to go to a higher level of thinking to create the change that you want to create in life. You know, there's an old phrase that my coach used to use is she said, if you were in a box and I told you how to get out of the box, would you do it? And I said, yes, of course. And she said, well, okay, the instructions on how to get out of the box are on the outside of the box, which means you have to get outside of the box to read the instructions to know how to get out of the box. And the same thing with you. We have to go to a higher level of thinking, which is what this program is about, to actually get you out of the lower level of thinking. We have to use a higher function of mind to move you from a lower function of mind. And we'll do that at the end of this program when we actually talk about and when you learn how to reprogram yourself. This is why you try to create change and it never happens for you, is because you try to create change from who you are, not even recognizing that who you are and who you're being is the person who created where you are, and you can't change and go from where you are to somewhere else because the person who created where you are is the person trying to create something different. I know I said a whole lot there, and it might even be a little convoluted, but the whole point is we've got to go to a higher level of thinking. Something I want you to get, big takeaway here, is you cannot do what you are not, and you can only do what you are. And if you're not making top income, plain and simple, it's because you're not a top producer first in your mind. You know, Sun Tzu said many years ago, a successful warrior wins in their mind and then goes to battle. A defeated warrior goes to battle and then tries to win. And if you look at your own life, look at how many times you've tried to change something in your life and you're trying to change your external circumstances, but you've never changed the person that you're being. You've never thought about changing your ways of being. You've never thought about changing your ways of thinking. You've never thought about changing the characteristics of who you are and how you show up in the world. And yet you take that person out in the world and you expect different results in terms of your external environment. Now, I don't have to tell you because you probably have years of experience proving this to yourself. That way to approach personal change doesn't work. The first sentence there at the top, you cannot do what you are not. You know, for example, I am not a smoker. And if I were to try to smoke, I would hack up a lung. I would choke. Why? Because I'm trying to do something that I am not. And the same thing with you growing your business or your health or wellness or whatever it is. Many times people try to actually create things, but they're not the kind of person yet in their subconscious identity to be able to create that. You know, we look out in the world and I see all these motivational speakers talking about goal setting. You've got to set your goals. And I've been to many large events where the whole audience will pull out a notebook and they'll start trying to set their goals. And I'm going to tell you this, a year later, literally less than 1 or 2% have hit those goals. Why? Here's something that most people do not talk about. If you were the kind of person to be able to achieve those goals, you would have already achieved those goals. Now, I'm not talking about milestones and things like that, but many times people will set goals that are way beyond anything they've ever accomplished before. And then a year later, they'll look back and they've never accomplished those goals. Why? Because they're not the kind of person, plain and simple, like Sun Tzu says. You've got to be it in your mind first. So they're trying to change their external environment with their old identity and their old mind, and it never happens. You know, many times people will say, Jim, what most people don't realize is how young we start learning our context and our beliefs. Quite literally, the second you pop out of the womb, you're like a video camera with a microphone and you're recording the world. And the world that you're born into teaches you how the world is. And if you're taught that it's a cruel world, You learn that and you become that and you live that. Not meaning you're going to become cruel, but that's the way that you view the world. We learn our beliefs at a very early age, and we learn our beliefs from our parents, our friends, our family, our social environments, and all socialization. And then very early in life, we're told and we're taught the way that the world is or is not based upon the environment that we're born into. So we first learn from our family, and then we learn from religious organizations. For example, my mother and my parents were Christians, they were Baptist. So I was indoctrinated in that religion, which I'll talk about in just a bit. So they started taking me to vacation Bible school when I was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old. And then that social structure started teaching me how the world is, what it's not, all these things based upon the tenets of that religion. And then we go to school very, very early. I think kids are going to school at 3 and 4 years old now. But I started in kindergarten at 5 years old, and we were taught about how the world works and how we have to behave and what social structure is and the stand in line and the raise your hand and don't speak until you're talked to and all these kind of things. So our social environments actually shape who we are. Not only that, when I was young, we only had three TV channels: ABC, CBS, NBC, and maybe PBS. But we learn about the world because we absorb things like a sponge. We learn about the world from media. And especially this day and age, you see kids as young as 2 years old that are actually playing on iPhones and playing on computers and everything else. And quite literally, they're being programmed about what the world is and what it's not. And then we have nationalization, which I'll show you in just a minute. And then we look at, as I alluded to, the environment that you grew up in. Did you grow up in a poor neighborhood? Did you grow up in a rich neighborhood? Did you grow up around a lot of money? Did you grow up around no money? However you grew up in your formative years, in your very early years, is most likely what you have been indoctrinated with and what I call imprinted with at the identity level. To give you an example of my own life, when I was in first grade, my teacher, her name was Mrs. Schilling, and we were taking a math test, and next day she actually gave it back to us, and I had a D on my paper. Mrs. Schilling put the paper on my desk and she looked at me and she said, "Jimmy, you're not very good at math." Now, let's fast forward many years later. I graduated near the top of my class in high school. I was in the top 10. Here's the thing though, I was horrible at math for most of my school years. And actually, I failed algebra in ninth grade. And my parents couldn't figure out why was I a straight A student everywhere else, but I kept failing math and I always had problems in math. Well, when I was a sophomore, we had a foreign exchange student from Japan that lived with us, and she helped me with math. And I made the highest grade in my math class the very next year. So what she did is she refuted the belief that I was bad in math. Now, where did I get that belief? I'm not entirely sure, but I do remember Mrs. Schilling in first grade looking at me saying, "You're not good at math." Now, we actually, until we're about 8 years old, anything that is said to us, we absorb. So I'm assuming that I absorbed that belief system based upon a belief system that somebody else gave me, which was my teacher, which was an authority figure. And then I was never good at math. And then I always heard my parents saying, "You're not good at math. You're not good at math. You're not good at math." So that's why later I was never good at it because I had an unconscious identity and belief that I wasn't good at it. And then once I broke that identity, math became very easy for me. So a question for you: where else in your life do you struggle with things? Do you struggle with money? Do you struggle with weight? Do you struggle with building your business? What I'm going to tell you right now is it's not your fault. You have learned something in your formative years, in your early years, about what you can do or what you can't do. And you've taken these things without even recognizing it, and you've carried it into adulthood. There's a quote here by Aristotle: "Give me a child until he is 7, and I will show you the man." There was a German psychologist back in the 1930s, I believe, and he said, "Give me a child until the age of 8, and I will own him for a lifetime." So what does this mean? Basically, what it means is that you are literally, and I mean literally as I'll show you, programmed to believe everything that you believe before about the age of 8 years old. We'll talk about the left hand and the right hand side of the brain in just a minute, but you were programmed to believe things not even knowing that you were programmed, and you operate out of those invisible programs today. So whatever you were programmed with until about the age of 8, rest assured, most likely those programs are still playing out in your unconscious background. Let's do a little check here. What is your current content box, meaning your beliefs subconsciously about business and money? So I'm going to put some things here on the screen and let's walk through these. And what I want you to notice is your response to the questions I'm about to ask you. First is this: What if you had a family member that happened to get sick and you have to come up with an extra $10,000 a month for medication? What's your immediate thought about that? Is it, oh my gosh, where in the world am I going to get that? Oh no, how? I don't know. How am I going to make that kind of money? Is your belief, not a big deal? That's really easy for me to do. What is your belief about that first scenario? Well, that belief comes from your unconscious identity. And if your first response is, oh my gosh, that's going to drive me into bankruptcy, or how am I going to do that, or there's no way I can come up with that, guess what context you're already working from? Look at the next one there. I can be the number one agent in my region or state, or the number one salesperson, or the number one entrepreneur, or whatever it is. Basically, I'm wanting you to look at a qualification. So let's say, for example, you're a real estate agent. And I said, you know what? You can be the number one agent in the United States. What's your response to that? Look at what you do for a living. And if I said, you know what? I can show you how to be the number one of whatever it is you do in the United States. What's your nanosecond immediate response? There's no way that can happen. You know, me? Are you serious? Why me? How me? I can't do that. Well, guess what? That's coming from your unconscious context. Now, also, I want to point out is that many times people get into self deception. People will say things like, oh, absolutely, I can do that. Yet they've never made over $100,000 a year. What happens there is that their left brain wants to believe it, meaning the analytical part of the brain wants to say, yes, I can do that. I can lose weight. I can get into shape. I can be the top salesperson in my company. And the left-hand side of the brain, the analytical side of the brain wants to believe that, but in their identity, they're always poor. So even though they might say, I can be the number one person in my company, in their identity, it will never happen and never happen in their external environment because they are not that at a subconscious level. And I keep saying that, but hopefully you're getting that. Every pattern that's playing out in your life right now is coming from your unconscious identity. And no matter how much we try to fool ourselves about what we can or cannot do, rest assured what you can or cannot do, no matter what you think, will be determined by what your identity is. How about this one? I can make $1 million a year. And I look at events all the time, and I go to very large events, and I speak at events, and there'll be people up on stage making $1 million a year saying, I can do it, you can do it. And everybody in the audience is like, yeah, I can do it, I can do it, especially at MLM and insurance events. Yes, I can do it. But you look back later and they've never done it. Why? Well, you know the answer to that. The reason why is because their analytical mind says, oh, yeah, if they can do it, I can do it. But in their identity, they're still poor. So anything that you say, which is a context, I can't do or be or have because, anytime you say that, and especially if you say something like that, that context will overshadow everything else. Let me give you an example. I had a client one time. He was a man. He's 57 years old. I worked with him last year one-to-one. And he said to me, he goes, no matter what I try, I cannot lose weight. So that's the context. That is the box that he's working within. So if he's working from that box, and no matter what I do, I can't lose weight, how successful do you think he's going to be with anything that he tries to do to lose weight? This is why people actually yo-yo. They try thing after thing after thing after thing after thing. And then what they do is they actually create a belief that they can't lose weight. Now, they don't want to believe that, but what happens is the unconscious mind believes because it's been hammered in with repetition that you can't lose weight. So they hop from diet to diet, an exercise program, and nutritionist, and they never get the results they want. Why? Again, plain and simple, because at the identity level, they are an overweight person. So I want to slow down here and I want you to get, and I've been there. Trust me, I teach this information, but I've been there. Anytime you're not getting what you want, go back up to that phrase I said a little earlier, is that you cannot be, do, or have something along those lines I said. You cannot do what you are not. So you may be chasing money and wanting to build a multi-million dollar business, but if you are not that in your identity, then it will never happen. And here's also something. If it's never happened, that already proves that you are not yet that and your identity. Okay, so you might be wondering, how do we change all of this? How do I get out of my old content box? Well, what you're going to start learning is how to reprogram your subconscious mind, which is your context. And what you're going to do is you're going to reprogram your old context with new context by using content. That might sound a little bit confusing because I'm talking about content and context. No worries, it'll all make sense as we continue to put this together. What I want you to do is I want you to look at your mind as a computer, your mind and your brain. Okay. Now I've got a MacBook Pro on the left-hand side of the screen there. And let's say, for example, years ago, back when I bought my first Mac, you had to buy, like their Pages program and all the add-on programs you had to buy. Now, if you have a MacBook Pro years back, and let's say, for example, that you wanted to create a document. Well, if you had not bought the software to create the document, even if you had the hardware, which is the MacBook Pro, you didn't have the software. So if you don't have the software, the hardware can't do what you want it to do. And that's what I want you to get about your life, is that your body and your brain are hardware, but the programming is the software. And if you don't have programming for the outcome that you want, then your body and brain can't do what you think you want it to do because it's not in the software. So I guess a different way to put that is that you can only do what you are programmed to do. And your program is your subconscious identity. Hopefully that makes sense. And if it doesn't, go below to the comment box and leave any comments or questions you might have. But again, we all look at ourselves and we judge ourselves all day long about I'm not this and I'm not that and I can't do this and I can't do that. All that we simply do and act upon is the unconscious identity and the programming. This is a really powerful slide. Everything you believe you have been programmed to believe. Think about that for a second. Everything you believe, you have been programmed to believe. Whatever you believe about religion, whether or not you agree or not, it doesn't matter to me. I'm telling you how the brain works. Whatever you believe for religion, you have been programmed to believe. Whatever you believe about nationality, you have been programmed to believe. Let me give you the best example. Go to the bottom picture there. That little boy there in the blue shirt, he's got his hand over his heart and he's pledging allegiance. Now, let me ask you, how old do you think that little boy looks? To me, he looks like he's about 5 years old, right? There's no way he's any older than 5 years old. This little boy is standing here and he's saying, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Do you think this little boy knows what allegiance is? Do you think this little boy even knows what he's saying? No, he doesn't. He didn't even understand the concept of allegiance or nationalism or geopolitics or pledging his life to a nation state. Yet, as a little boy, he is being programmed and indoctrinated as to what he should think for a lifetime. And make no mistake, the same has been done to you. And that's quite a sobering thought when we realize that we go through most of our lifetime not even realizing that we have been programmed to go through a lifetime with programming that other people have downloaded into our brains. So I go back and I say to you again, pretty much everything that you believe, you have been programmed to believe. And if you're not getting the outcomes that you think that you want in life, it's not about you, it's about the programming that has been downloaded into your brain when you were a small child. Here we have a picture of Steve Jobs, and at the top it says, most of us live an entire lifetime living someone else's beliefs. My brother-in-law is a Yaqui shaman. Shamans were actually advisors to Mayan kings. They've been around. Anthropologists can trace them back 70,000 years. My brother-in-law's mentors, people that taught him, and he started apprenticing with a shaman when he was 6 years old. We were in Sedona last year, and I travel with him a lot, and I actually apprentice with him a lot. And he said, along the lines of what I'm sharing with you now, is he goes, we are literally programmed as children, and we are programmed with other people's beliefs. And then he goes, you know what? We learn other people's beliefs, we take them as our beliefs, and we live an entire lifetime as a conscious being, not even realizing that we're living out someone else's reality and someone else's belief system. So think about that. Do you choose to continue to live by other people's beliefs and realities, or do you now choose to reprogram yourself with what it is that you want to create in life? And then Steve Jobs there said, your time is limited, which is very true. So don't waste it living someone else's life. There's an old story that I want to share with you very quickly. This little girl, year after year, used to watch her mother prepare the Christmas ham. And every year she'd watch the mother cut off the end of the ham, put it aside, and bake the rest. And one year she said, Mom, why do you cut off the end of the ham every year? And she goes, I don't know. I just learned that from your grandmother and I've done it, for many years. And so the little girl says, well, let's ask Grandma why. And so the mom asked Grandma why, her mother, why you cut the end of the ham off every year. And the grandma said, oh, that's easy. I only had a pan this big, indicating that the normal ham wouldn't fit in there. So again, you learn from your parents, and everything that you believe, you've learned to believe. And to show you how pervasively this even pervades culture, do you know why, for example, the space shuttle is the width that it is? When I say width, how wide the space shuttle is. Do you know why the space shuttle is the width that it is? Now, most of you probably don't know that answer, but the answer is this. The answer is the space shuttle is the width that it is because the space shuttle, when it's being built, is transported on railroad tracks and a train. So therefore, the space shuttle has to be to certain specifications to be able to fit into a train, to fit obviously for a train to fit on train tracks to be transported. However, what people don't know is that train tracks today are the same dimension that Roman chariot tracks used to be thousands of years ago. So the space shuttle today is still affected by something that was started and created thousands of years ago. That's mind blowing, isn't it? But that's how we live as human beings. We literally follow culture and society and beliefs, and we become trapped as beings. Okay, so let's look at the left hand side and the right hand side of the brain. Two sides of the brain that are responsible for very different functions. The left-hand side of your brain is the practical, analytical side of your brain. It's the rational side of your brain. It's the part of the brain responsible for analysis and mathematics and language and spatial relationships and time and anything analytical. It's the seat of short-term memory. On the right, and it's completely logical. On the right-hand side of the brain, that part of the brain is the seat of long-term memory. It's completely illogical, irrational. It's the seat of emotions. It's the seat of color and texture. It's the creative side of the brain. It's the emotional side of the brain, so to speak. So you have the analytical left brain and the non-analytical right brain, and we have to actually access the unconscious mind through the right-hand side of the brain, and that's what we're going to do with self-hypnosis and a couple of other techniques that I'm going to show you in this training. I think you get, because I spent quite a bit of time on it, is that your life is a printout of your programming. Your life is a direct reflection right now today of what you have been programmed to think. And what you have been programmed to think determines, because that's who you're being, determines what you do, and what you do determines the outcomes that you get. I also want you to understand a lot of people get into fear at this point, and people think, oh my gosh, what if I can't change? I've been doing this for a lot of years. I'm 50 years old. I mean, geez, how can you teach, an old dog a new trick? What I want you to understand right now is it does not matter what you have been programmed to believe. I'll say it again. It does not matter what you have been programmed to believe because your brain can change. We talked about neural pathways up in the habit program, but you can simply reprogram. It's like actually upgrading your software. Plain and simple, that's what it is. So your old software might not be working for you, but we can actually delete that software and we can add new software, and the new software can be consistent with the outcomes that you want to create in life. So please, again, if you're getting into any fear about being able to change, change quite simply is going to happen with the process that I'm going to show you. And the process that I'm going to show you works in accordance with the way that the brain works. Okay, so this is what you've been waiting for. How to reprogram your subconscious mind. What I want to share with you is that it's very easy to do. As a matter of fact, everything that you need and everything required to reprogram your subconscious mind, you already do all day long on a daily basis. However, what you're doing is you're reprogramming yourself out of your old programming and you're literally going in a circle. It's kind of like, for example, the old joke here in Texas with Texas Aggies. If you want to drive an Aggie crazy, you put him in a round room and tell him to sit in the corner. And that's what most of us do is we go in circles. So what you do is you keep reprogramming yourself each and every day with your old programming by what you talk to yourself about, what you see, what you hear, what you imagine that you hear, and what you feel. And then you actually take your old programming and recreate it, which actually perpetuates the old programming. So to reprogram yourself, you already know how, but we have to program your mind and your brain with a different content. And when we program with different content, we will change the context, which is your unconscious beliefs. Okay, I'm going to really slow down on this slide. You have to get this. Now, as we're going through this program, watch this program several times, at least this part of the program, module number 2. What people tend to do is they tend to not hear a lot of what I say because they're actually working out of old context and they miss the most important points. Right here, I want you to get, and if you have not gone through the habit program up above, go through that program. What I want you to understand is this. is your old habits will try to talk you out of change. Your old habits will talk you out of the things that you need to do to create a new you. And that's why, and we'll talk about this at the end of our time in this program, you must be committed. You must be 100% in and committed to creating a new you. Because, see, as you learned in the other program, the habit program, is that every habit that we do, the reptilian part of the brain believes that habit is necessary for survival. So, whoever you are today, you've created through habit. And the brain, the reptilian part of the brain, doesn't want to change that habit because it believes that habit is necessary for your survival. So, any new change that you try to create and a new you that you try to create, the reptilian part of the brain believes that that new you is actually going to destroy the habit, which the brain sees as a necessary thing for survival. That's why it's so hard for most people to change, is because they're actually driven by the reptilian part of the brain. They try to do things new, and the brain pulls them right back into their old patterns again. And again, when I say brain, just to be clear, the reptilian part of the brain. Now, we'll cover this a little more, but I wanted to introduce this early on, is that you must be committed to creating a new you, because if you're not 100% in and committed, number one, you'll be the same person and have the same results next year, 3 years, and 5 years from now, and wonder why. But secondly, by not knowing this, the older part of the brain will pull you back into your old habits. And now knowing this, you have a way to break, at least by understanding this, breaking the old habits and the old patterns. Okay, so here we go. How to reprogram your mind. The entire formula is really quite simple. It's consistency, repetition, and emotional imagery accepted as already true. There's your entire formula, and I'm sure you've heard this in some format in the past, but I'm going to really, really break this down for you. Consistency, repetition, and emotional imagery accepted as already true. And let's look at each one of these individually. Okay, step number one is consistent repetition. What does that mean? My brother-in-law, the shaman, and I were talking one day, and he said all mastery in life is created through consistent repetition. So if you think about how you've learned to do everything in your life, I don't care what it is, whether you're in the gymnastics or even fishing or golf or bowling or work or even walking as an infant, everything that you have learned and everything that you have mastered through repetition. Your brain actually learns. Think about learning to read when you were a kid, learning to do math, learning to tie your shoes. Get this point. You must get this. Your brain learns through repetition. And we're going to use repetition to reprogram your subconscious mind. Now, there's a great deal of science in this program as well. Your brain, neurologists have discovered, responds to repetition at about 10 trials. What that means is if you do something once, the brain's like, no big deal. You do it again, no big deal. You do it a third time, the brain's like, no big deal. When you do things, and neurologists say that it takes about 10 trials, when you do something the same way 10 times in a row, so the brain says, oh, okay, I get it. She's done that 10 times like that, the same way, each and every time. She must want me to create a habit. So she's done it that many times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating a habit now. So that's why some of the things I'm going to show you in a bit, it's very important that you do it exactly like I show you. Now, you also hear in culture that it takes 21 days to change a habit. That is not true. A couple of ways to look at this. My brother-in-law shared with me many years ago a concept. When we look at repetition, talking about repetition and habit breaking, my brother-in-law shared with me one day, he said, most people don't recognize that in any given moment we can add or delete something from our life, but yet we don't recognize that we have that power. So again, you hear people saying 21 days. Yeah, it could take 21 days. It could take 1 hour. For example, when I stopped drinking Diet Coke, literally, boom, just like that, finger snap, I stopped a 20-year habit instantaneously. So it all comes down to number one is what is your motivation? That's why I said earlier, you must be committed to creating a new you. You must be motivated to create a new you. If you're doing this passingly and fleetingly, then guess what? Again, a year from now, you're going to be the same person you are today, getting the same results. So neuroscientists have also said in a lot of research that it can take up to about 67 days, 67 days for anything that we're doing consistently daily and day in, day out, for that to become a completely unconsciously competent habit, which means you have successfully ingrained at an unconscious level a brand new habit. So your takeaway from step number 1 is to reprogram your subconscious mind, you must use consistent repetition with the new programming. I cannot say it any more simply than that. So step number 1, consistent repetition. Okay, this concludes Module 2. Come on back to Module 3 and we'll work through the rest of the steps to show you what you need to do to create a new identity.